I was listening to Rajiv's speech. Uh, you know, water was not enough for me. My colleague saw that and gave me a cup of coffee. Right? I'm sure you all have gone through that, right? So much of a disruption. Amazing presentation, Rajiv. Eye-opener, I would say. Scary, too. How many of you think is scary? Almost all of you. Even I felt, it was the same for me. What's going to happen in my business? But suddenly I realized it's not scary. Actually, it's an opportunity for all of us sitting here today. It's a big, big opportunity, and that's my story. Every time I did something something good was when my business got disrupted. Every time it happened. In my journey as an entrepreneur, I started around very young, and about 18, 19, I had my first company. And I've built about 8, 9 companies so far. The 9th one in AI space is starting out. And every time my business got disrupted, I come up with an idea which did 10 times bigger. And even though scary it may look like, I see a huge opportunity for all of you. All of you need to think of it as a lifetime opportunity for you. When there is so much of disruption, it requires entrepreneurs to capitalize on that. So I would leave you guys with that thought. But before I go into the presentation, I don't have many slides or anything. So building a company of 1,000 crores, there are many things to discuss. We can go on for days, There are, but I would like to understand from you guys, what could be the most interesting things that I can talk to you in the next few minutes with you guys. Are you guys, how many of you are entrepreneurs here? Oh, wow, awesome. And how many of you are in the first 3-year phase and at the very beginning phase, like in the idea stage? And how many of you are been there in the business and done it to a certain level and looking to the scale? It's a pretty mix. So I think in a few minutes you need to cover all of them maybe. I was born in a small town about 50 kilometers from here. I studied Telugu medium, went to local school, which was like 3-room school, pretty basic. For those of you who have been to government schools, it's kind of one of them. And I started my first company when I was 19. We did some small development of apps, software apps, and very, very tiny way. If I look at my life, graph it, it'll be like this. First up was, first 4 or 5 years, I established one of the first internet services company here called Pioneer, and sold almost 90% of my capacity even before the launch. Thought I was doing great. And then I launched another product in the related area called Aladdin. Again, the same, 90% market share in the space. It's a kind of ERP suite for telecom and internet service companies, which I built while doing the first company. And recognition when I was very young, and media industry. So I was a keynote when I was 23, 24, and recognized in the city as the entrepreneur, the tech entrepreneur in those days and stuff like that. success got into my head. I thought this is it, right? And things have changed suddenly. After the dot-com, e-commerce meltdowns, free internet services companies have come. So obviously all the revenues have become zero, near zero, I would say. Yeah, there are still some customers. And pretty much every month I was searching for money to pay my employees. I have depleted all my cash flows, all my bank balances, even my credit cards to pay the bills at the end of the month. Literally, I became, the next moment was complete bankrupt. At first, I refused to accept it, that this could happen. My close friends used to work with me at that time, and they used to tell me, Sridhar, it's done, over, right? Move on, pick up a job, or this is dead. I refused to accept for a few months. And slowly that realization sank into me. And of course, then once that reality sinks in, I think the real entrepreneur, again, that's what I call it, as a big disruption, which happened in my life. Those days, if anyone of you looked at me, to give you the example, a few years ago, 2 years ago, a visitor walked into my office. And Sridhar, 10 years ago, I met your father. And I told him, no, you met me. So that's how my state was, completely disrupted, physically, mentally, emotionally. And then we changed the business model. Long story short, I had to survive with doing consulting jobs, system integration projects, staffing, whatnot. I mean, what are all the low-hanging fruits of the tech world I've done? And then the big idea came in terms of data centers. And we started our first data center company, Ctrls, in 2007, and got signed AT&T as our first client, and then built the company from there onwards. Yes, at those days, at the same time, same disruption. By 2003-4, all the data centers worldwide, all the global leaders went bankrupt. For those of you who have tracked that industry. But I saw an opportunity in that big disruption of data centers, where everyone was almost either bankrupt or getting sold for a song. But that's when I saw the opportunity of data centers. And the rest is history. We built, this is where we started. This is right next to In Orbit. We don't put our name. It's still in the name of Pioneer Towers. That's where India's first Tier 4 data center is. It's pretty much full. We have one more in Gachibowli now. And then we've built our second one in Bombay. This became the biggest Tier 4 in Asia 6 years ago when we built it. Right now we're beating it. We've built another one there. Overall, right now we have about 6 data centers. And as we speak, we are planning 12 more data centers. Basically, we are planning campuses now in both Bombay and Hyderabad. And then I started one more company. Of course, there were several disruptions within Ctrls, right? The slowdowns happened 2008-9. Immediately after we started, again, this big hit. So we built the company only for kind of a very, very large enterprises, Fortune 100, India's top 100 banks, etc. And the slowdown hit. CapEx of all these companies froze. And we became, again, trading, big unforeseen circumstances. We changed the business model again, and so on and so forth, yeah. And then I started one more company to focus on the cloud wave again. The whole world said, this is another example of disruption. When the hyperscale companies have come, the Amazon, AWS, and Google, and Azure, and Alibaba, Tencents, the mightiest companies of the world are in the cloud business. And that's the time I started my cloud venture, about 4 or 5 years ago. And people said again, Sridhar, you're going to go for a suicide attempt. Yes, all the cloud players' business in India got disrupted completely. CP, NetMagic, Tatacom, everyone's business got disrupted. Their volume shrunk, or they didn't grow at all during the last 5 years. Whereas in the last 5 years, we were at, 5 years ago, we were a 10 crore company. Right now we built, this is my fastest growing company, not as fast as the unicorns that you showed, Rajiv, but yeah, we built a $100 million recurring revenue company in less than about 4 years. And right now we operate in about 21 countries across the world. So between these two, our current run rate has crossed about 1,200 crores with a healthy EBITDA close to 50%. So I found opportunities in the cloud space as well. There are many things that these big guys can't do. That's what we are focused on. And also on top of them, we actually work with them to provide a layer of services on top of them. Overall, this has been, and we are gunning for $1 billion enterprise soon, hopefully by 23. But the numbers don't, I mean, top line is not my key criteria of building a company. My key criteria of building a company is a sustainable organization with a clear vision and a company which adds value to its customers, solves business problems. So with this, I stop. We have a few more minutes, and I would take any question that anyone may have here. Yes, Rajiv.
Thanks for the positive story, because in every disruption there is an opportunity, actually. Incredible story. I've been around, I've seen the bust of Exodus and all that, because I've come from that infrastructure world. I used to run a company called Computer Associates, and they used to manage all the data center. What an incredible, entrepreneur story, actually. Having been an entrepreneur twice, actually, so I can relate to it. What has been your biggest learning? What is the one message? There are so many entrepreneurs out here. What is the one message you will give it to them after getting bankrupt and again building something incredible?
I think the idea has to be the business, the space that you're in, has to first solve a problem and solve an industry problem, number one. Number two, so the idea itself is the biggest, and the strategic positioning it takes in that industry. I think that's the key. If you get it wrong, by a few degrees here or there, you would, instead of being a $10 billion company, you could be a, $10 million company. That big difference to begin with. And after that, of course, how you build the company, team, how do you scale it, how do you finance it? And most important is, that's what I do, how do you gain those insights that you are able to see what's going to happen in the next 1 to 5 years? And then, yes, first mover, I didn't have to even put my sales guys there. I don't have sales people, I just have some 1 or 2 relationship people per continent. That's it. And it's all, clients pulling us rather than we trying and going to sell them, just the idea, right? So that's the interesting phase that we are in, of a major disruption happening across the industry verticals. Raju was right, if there is no digital, there is no business. And that's an amazing opportunity. It's a life. I don't think our previous generation has that kind of an opportunity. So